The clinking of crystal glasses, the low hum of conversation, and the faint scent of aged bourbon filled the air of the exclusive Hawthorne Club, a private lounge reserved for the elite of New York City. It was the kind of place where deals were made over 100-year-old whiskey, where fortunes were doubled or destroyed with a flick of the wrist. Ethan Carter sat at the center of it all, the golden boy of the tech world, flanked by the only men who could consider themselves his equals, Blake Davenport, Lucas Westwood, and Anthony Sinclair. Blake leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink lazily. "Tell me, Carter," he drawled, smirking. "You ever get tired of it?" Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Of what?" "This." Blake gestured around the opulent room. The waitstaff in tailored uniforms, the low jazz playing in the background, the money, the women, the predictability of it all. Lucas chuckled. "Careful, Blake. You sound like a man having a midlife crisis at 35. Blake ignored him. His eyes gleamed with something mischievous, dangerous. "You know what your problem is, Ethan." "Do enlighten me," Ethan replied dryly, taking a sip of his whiskey. "You've never done anything outside of your comfort zone. You only date women who already live in our world. Models, heiresses, socialites. The women who chase you because they know who you are. Because they know what you can give them." Ethan smirked. "And what's wrong with that?" Blake leaned forward, his voice dropping just enough to make the others listen. "I bet you couldn't win over a woman who has no idea who you are. Someone real. Someone normal. Hell, I bet you wouldn't last 6 months married to a regular woman without screwing it up." Lucas and Anthony let out amused chuckles, but Ethan's expression remained unreadable. His fingers tapped against his glass. Blake took his silence as encouragement. "In fact, let's make it interesting." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contact list, before turning the screen toward the group. "See her?" He pointed at the image of a young woman working behind a fast food counter. Jasmine Brooks, a McDonald's employee. Dark-skinned, with a quiet strength in her eyes, her natural curls tied back. In a loose ponytail, she was mid-motion, handing a customer their order, completely unaware that her face was now the subject of amusement among some of the wealthiest men in the country. Ethan studied the image. She wasn't like the women he usually pursued. Glamorous, poised, accustomed to a world of privilege. But something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the sincerity in her smile, or the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, even in the midst of a minimum-wage job. Blake grinned. $5 million says you can't make her fall in love with you and marry her within 6 months. Anthony whistled. "Now, that's a challenge." Ethan set his glass down. "You're out of your mind." "Am I?" Blake smirked. "You've got all the charm, all the money, all the resources in the world. How hard could it be?" Lucas chuckled. "Unless, of course, you think you'd lose." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had never walked away from a challenge, never backed down from a bet. It was part of the reason he was who he was today. $5 million meant nothing to him. But the challenge, the thrill of proving he could win at anything, that was something he couldn't resist. "You're on," Ethan said, leaning forward. "But don't think for a second that this will be difficult. I always win." Blake raised his glass, clearly satisfied. "We'll see, Carter. We'll see." As the night continued, the conversation shifted to other topics: investments, stocks, upcoming acquisitions. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't focused on the business deals in front of him. Instead, his mind was on a woman who had no idea who he was. A woman he had just bet he could make fall in love with him. And in that moment, Ethan had no idea just how much he was about to lose. The smell of deep-fried oil and freshly brewed coffee clung to the air, a stark contrast to the usual atmosphere Ethan Carter was accustomed to. The golden arches of McDonald's shone brightly outside as he pushed open the glass door, stepping into a world he had rarely set foot in. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe the place to feel different, less mundane. But it was just like any other fast food joint. Customers lined up at the counter, teenagers in red and yellow uniforms moving quickly behind the registers. The soft beep of fryers signaling another batch of fries was ready. And then, there she was, Jasmine Brooks. She stood behind the counter, taking orders with a quiet efficiency, her voice calm, despite the rush of impatient customers. Her dark curls were pulled into a ponytail, her uniform slightly wrinkled from what had likely been a long shift. She smiled politely as she handed a bag of food to a customer, her warm brown eyes betraying a flicker of exhaustion. Ethan watched, intrigued. She wasn't overly friendly, nor did she have that fake, rehearsed enthusiasm he'd seen in so many service workers forced to paste on a smile for minimum wage. There was something real about her, genuine, and for reasons he couldn't quite understand, that made him curious. He stepped forward, slipping into the line. It didn't take long before it was his turn. Jasmine looked up, her smile polite but impersonal. "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you?" Ethan studied her for a second longer than necessary. "This is it, the beginning of the game." "A coffee?" he said smoothly. "Black." Jasmine punched it into the register. "That'll be $2.19. Ethan reached into his pocket. But before he could pull out his wallet, he realized something. He didn't have cash. Or more specifically, he didn't have anything less than a platinum American Express card with an unlimited limit, a card he was fairly sure McDonald's employees didn't see often. Jasmine's expression didn't change when he handed it to her, though he saw the slight hesitation in her fingers as she swiped it. I don't think I've ever seen one of these before," she admitted, raising an eyebrow. He smirked. "First time for everything." She handed the card back, placing the receipt on his tray with his coffee. "Enjoy your drink." That was it. No lingering gaze, no curiosity about why a man in a custom Tom Ford Sua was standing in a McDonald's at 9 p.m. She had already moved on, greeting the next customer. No interest, no reaction, nothing. Ethan stepped to the side, watching as she continued taking orders, effortlessly switching between customer after customer, without sparing him a second glance. Well, that was unexpected. Most women noticed him. Most wanted to be noticed by him. But Jasmine? She had dismissed him like he was just another guy ordering coffee. Interesting. Over the next week, Ethan made frequent visits to that same McDonald's. He showed up at different times, ordered different things, sometimes coffee, sometimes breakfast, once even a Happy Meal, which had earned him an amused look from Jasmine, but nothing more. Each time, he tried to engage her in conversation. And each time, she gave him nothing. Short responses, minimal eye contact, no personal details. It was driving him insane. But instead of frustrating him, it made him want to try harder. Because for the first time in years, he had met a woman who wasn't impressed by his presence. And he found that fascinating. It was late Friday night when Ethan walked into McDonald's once again. This time, the place was quieter, with only a few customers scattered around. Jasmine was cleaning up a spill near the soda machine when a man in a rumpled hoodie and stained jeans stormed up to the counter. "I've been waiting for 10 minutes, he snapped at the young cashier. "Where the hell is my food?" The boy at the register looked nervous, barely 18, his hands shaking as he tried to explain the delay. But the man wasn't interested in an apology. He slammed his fist down on the counter. This is bullshit. Ethan tensed, ready to step in. But before he could, Jasmine was already there. Sir, she said firmly, stepping between the customer and the cashier. I understand you're frustrated, but we're doing the best we can. Your order is coming out now. The man glared at her. I don't need some girl telling me to be patient. Jasmine didn't flinch, and I don't need some man yelling at my coworker for something that isn't his fault. Ethan was impressed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't escalate the situation. But her presence alone was enough to make the man take a step back. For a long moment, he stared at her, as if debating whether to argue. And then, finally, he grabbed his bag and stormed out. Jasmine let out a quiet sigh before turning back to the cashier. You okay? The kid nodded, clearly relieved. Good, she said with a small smile. Next time, just call me over. Don't let guys like that ruin your night. She turned, and that's when she saw Ethan watching her. He wasn't smirking like before. He wasn't wearing that arrogant, overconfident look she had grown used to. He was just watching. Jasmine wiped her hands on a napkin, then walked over to where Ethan stood, leaning casually against the counter. Enjoy the show? She asked dryly. Ethan chuckled. I have to say I'm impressed. She raised an eyebrow. By what? The way you handled that. He nodded toward the door, where the angry customer had left. Most people would have backed down. You didn't. Jasmine shrugged. I don't have the luxury of backing down. Ethan studied her, intrigued. What do you mean? She sighed, glancing around the restaurant before meeting his gaze. Guys like him? They think they can push people around because they're bigger, louder, angrier. She crossed her arms. I grew up knowing that the second you let someone like that think they can walk over you, they won't stop. Ethan tilted his head, genuinely curious. So what? You decided to fight back. Something like that. Her lips quirked into a small smile. Though I prefer to think of it as standing my ground. Ethan found himself grinning. She was nothing like the women he usually pursued, and for the first time in years, he felt a genuine flicker of interest. Not because of the bet, not because she was a challenge, but because she was Jasmine. And she had no idea just how much she was about to change his life. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Ethan Carter sat in his usual corner booth at McDonald's, sipping from a cup that he barely tasted. It had become a habit, one he hadn't planned for. Every morning, every evening, sometimes even in the afternoon, he found himself coming back. At first, it had been about the bet, a game, a challenge. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. Jasmine Brooks had slipped into his thoughts in a way he hadn't anticipated. Her fierce independence, her quiet resilience, the way she held herself with an unshakable confidence, despite the long hours and demanding customers. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. And that was dangerous. Back again? Jasmine's voice cut through his thoughts as she approached his table, her eyebrow raised in mild amusement. Ethan looked up, smirking. I think I might be addicted to McDonald's coffee. She crossed her arms, giving him a pointed look. No one is addicted to McDonald's coffee. Maybe I just like the atmosphere. He gestured vaguely around the restaurant. Jasmine huffed a laugh. Right, because nothing screams luxury like sticky booths and fluorescent lighting. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. All right, you got me. Maybe I just enjoy our conversations. Jasmine rolled her eyes, but didn't walk away. That's funny. I don't remember us having a real conversation. Ethan grinned. Then, maybe it's time to change that. She hesitated, glancing around at the nearly empty restaurant before letting out a small sigh. I've got 5 minutes before my break ends. Impress me. For the first time, Jasmine sat down across from him. Ethan hadn't expected that. She had been keeping her distance, always standing, always maintaining control. But now, she was giving him a chance. "All right, rich boy," Jasmine said, resting her elbows on the table. "Let's hear it. What's your deal?" "My deal?" Ethan echoed, amused. She nodded. "Guys like you don't hang around places like this unless they have a reason. So what's yours?" Ethan studied her carefully. He could tell she didn't trust easily. That much was clear in the way she held herself, in the way she watched him, as if waiting for him to say something that would confirm whatever assumptions she had already made. "I guess you could say I was looking for something different," he said finally. "Something real." Jasmine's lips twitched. "So, you came to McDonald's?" Ethan chuckled. "Strange, right?" She leaned back, arms still crossed. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I don't have time for guys like you." "Guys like me?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Rich, bored, looking for a distraction." Her tone was blunt, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something uncertain. Ethan exhaled slowly. "What if I told you I'm just a guy trying to have a normal conversation with someone interesting?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, as if trying to determine whether he was lying. Finally, she shrugged. "Then, I'd say you have 3 minutes left." Ethan smirked. "All right, your turn. What's your deal?" Jasmine tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ethan leaned forward. "Why are you here? What's your story?" Jasmine hesitated, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then, her gaze dropped slightly, and her voice softened. "I didn't have a choice." Ethan stilled. "My parents died when I was 18, she continued, her fingers playing with the edge of a napkin. "Car accident. It was just me and Mia after that." Mia. Ethan remembered the name from the quick research he had done before making his move. Jasmine's 15-year-old sister. The person she had dedicated her life to raising. "I had plans," Jasmine admitted. "College, a career. But that all changed. I had to work, had to make sure Mia had everything she needed." Ethan felt something stir in his chest. Jasmine wasn't just surviving, she was sacrificing, and she did it without complaint, without resentment. "How old is she now?" he asked. 15, Jasmine said with a small smile. "Smart as hell, stubborn as me." Ethan chuckled. "Sounds like trouble." Jasmine nodded. "She is, but she's also my everything." There was a warmth in her voice, a depth of love that Ethan wasn't sure he had ever experienced himself. And that realization hit him harder than expected. Jasmine glanced at the clock and sighed. "Break's over." Ethan opened his mouth to say something, anything, but she was already standing. "Thanks for the chat, Ethan," she said. And for the first time, his name didn't sound like an accusation on her lips. Before he could respond, she was already walking away. And for the first time since this bet began, Ethan wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about her. The next few weeks followed a strange routine. Ethan kept coming back. Jasmine kept pretending not to notice. But slowly something changed. She stopped brushing him off so quickly. She let their conversations last a little longer. She started asking questions about him. And Ethan, for the first time in years, found himself answering them honestly. One evening, as the restaurant was winding down for the night, Jasmine approached him, not at his usual booth, but at his car in the parking lot. Ethan, who had just been about to leave, raised an eyebrow. "Following me now?" Jasmine smirked. "You wish." He chuckled. "So what's up?" She hesitated for a moment before sighing. I don't know what your deal is, Carter, but you keep coming back. Maybe I like the food. Jasmine rolled her eyes. Okay, fine, Ethan said, leaning against his car. Maybe I like you. Silence. Jasmine crossed her arms. I'm not looking for a Prince Charming. Good, Ethan replied, because I'm not one. She studied him, then sighed. Look, I don't trust easily. And guys like you, they don't stick around. Ethan met her gaze, his expression serious. Then, let me prove you wrong. Jasmine's lips parted slightly, as if caught off guard. But then she shook her head. Good night, Ethan. And just like that she walked away. But for the first time she looked back. Ethan smiled. She wasn't indifferent anymore. And that meant he was one step closer. The cool breeze of early autumn swept through the streets of Brooklyn, rustling the golden leaves as Ethan Carter pulled into the parking lot of Brooklyn Community Center. It had been weeks since he first stepped into that McDonald's. Weeks since he accepted the ridiculous bet that now felt like something else entirely. Jasmine Brooks was still a challenge, but not in the way he had originally thought. She wasn't just a woman he needed to win over. She was someone worth knowing, and that terrified him. Ethan hadn't told anyone where he was going that afternoon. Not Blake, not Lucas, not Anthony. They wouldn't understand. Hell, even he wasn't sure he understood anymore. Yet, here he was, standing outside the community center. Jasmine volunteered at every weekend, watching as she helped a group of kids set up for an afternoon tutoring session. She was different here, not the overworked McDonald's employee juggling back-to-back shifts, not the guarded woman who kept her walls high. Here, so she was herself. She laughed freely, her face lighting up as she spoke to the children, encouraging them with a patience Ethan never would have. And for the first time he wondered, was this why she had rejected his world so easily? Because this was what mattered to her. Jasmine barely had time to process her surprise when she saw him standing by the entrance, hands in his pockets, looking completely out of place in his tailored black coat and designer boots. She set down a box of notebooks and walked over, crossing her arms. You lost? Ethan smirked. You've asked me that before. And yet, here you are, she countered. I thought I'd check out this place you talk about so much, Ethan said casually. See what all the fuss is about. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. So let me get this straight. You, a billionaire tech mogul, voluntarily walked into a community center. Ethan shrugged. Maybe I wanted to see if I could help. Jasmine stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head with a chuckle. Yeah, okay. Let's get one thing straight, Carter. This isn't your world. I know, Ethan said, surprising her with his honesty. But maybe that's the problem. Jasmine frowned slightly. What do you mean? Ethan hesitated before speaking. Maybe I've spent too much time in places that don't matter. Something flickered across Jasmine's face, but before she could respond, a voice called out behind her. Miss Brooks, Dante took my pencil again. Jasmine turned, rolling her eyes. Dante, give it back, or I'm making you do extra reading practice. A small boy with wild curls and mischievous eyes appeared, grinning as he handed back a pencil to his annoyed classmate. Ethan watched the exchange with mild amusement. And who's this troublemaker? Jasmine sighed, ruffling Dante's hair. This is Dante. He's 12, and apparently the world's biggest headache. Dante smirked. I prefer the world's funniest genius. Ethan chuckled. Big title. Dante squinted up at him. You a teacher? Jasmine snorted. Oh, God, no. Ethan smirked. What? I don't look like a teacher? You look like you charge people money just to talk to you, Dante quipped. Jasmine burst out laughing. Ethan gave the kid a mock-offended look. "All right, kid. Point taken." Dante grinned. "Good. Now that you're here, you should help." Ethan blinked. "Help?" Jasmine smirked. "Yeah, rich boy. You wanted to see what this place is about? Grab a chair." For the first time in years, Ethan found himself completely out of his element, and he liked it. For the next hour, Ethan did something he never expected. He helped tutor a group of rowdy kids in math. At first, they tested him, throwing rapid-fire questions to see if the rich guy actually knew anything. But to their surprise, Ethan was good. He explained things differently, using stories about business and numbers in ways that actually clicked with them. Even Jasmine, who had been watching from a distance, was impressed. By the time the session ended, the kids were grinning at Ethan like he was one of them. "All right," Dante said, nodding approvingly. "You're not so bad." Ethan smirked. High praise coming from the world's funniest genius. Dante grinned. "Don't forget it." As the kids packed up, Jasmine approached, arms crossed, but her expression softer than before. "Not bad, Carter," she admitted. Ethan glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Are you saying I earned my place here?" Jasmine rolled her eyes, but didn't deny it. That night, Ethan did something unexpected. He called his assistant. "Find out what Brooklyn Community Center needs," he said. "Supplies, books, funding, whatever it is, and do it anonymously." The next morning, when Jasmine walked into the center, she froze. Piles of brand-new books, school supplies, laptops, and even desks filled the room. The kids cheered, running to check out the new materials. Jasmine, however, just stood there, her heart pounding. She knew who had done this, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Later that evening, as Ethan sat at his usual booth at McDonald's, he wasn't surprised when Jasmine slid into the seat across from him. But what did surprise him was the look in her eyes. "You did it, didn't you?" Ethan set down his coffee. "Did what?" Jasmine huffed. "Don't play dumb, Carter. The donations, the laptops, it was you." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I just wanted to help." Jasmine's lips parted slightly, something unreadable crossing her face. "You really don't give up, do you?" Ethan smiled. "Not when something's worth it." She stared at him, and for the first time, she didn't look like she wanted to walk away. Something changed after that. Jasmine still kept her walls up, but they weren't as high. Ethan, for the first time, wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about deserving her trust. And Jasmine, she was starting to see him differently. Maybe he wasn't just a rich guy playing a game. Maybe he was something more. And that was terrifying. But it was also exciting. For both of them, she sighed. "Fine. But no fancy penthouse restaurants. If you show up in a tux, I'm leaving." Ethan grinned. "Noted." Jasmine expected him to take her somewhere expensive, some upscale spot where a steak cost more than her entire month's rent. Instead, she found herself sitting in a small family-owned Italian restaurant, tucked away in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. It was warm, the smell of fresh bread and garlic filling the air. She glanced at Ethan, who was studying the menu, as if he didn't already know what he was ordering. "You surprise me," she admitted. Ethan smirked. "I get that a lot." Jasmine rolled her eyes, but smiled as she flipped open the menu. The place felt real, not some manufactured experience meant to impress her. And for a moment, she let herself relax. "So," Jasmine said, swirling the water in her glass, "tell me something real." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Real? Yeah, something that's not a perfect CEO answer. No business talk, no flashy successes, just real." Ethan leaned back, considering. No one had ever asked him that before. I almost walked away from my company last year, he said finally. Jasmine blinked, caught off guard. Why? Ethan hesitated. Because I realized that everything I built, everything I thought I wanted, felt empty. Jasmine studied him. So, why didn't you? Ethan let out a short laugh. Because I'm a coward. Jasmine tilted her head. I don't buy that. Ethan's lips twitched. Yeah, neither do I. They looked at each other, and for the first time, the usual teasing faded into something quieter. Something real. Jasmine set her fork down. Okay, my turn. What's your deal? Ethan smirked. That's a broad question. You know what I mean, she threw, narrowing her eyes. You just showed up one day, all mysterious and charming, but you never really say much about yourself. Ethan hesitated for 1 second too long, because this was the moment he could tell her the truth about the bet, about how all of this had started as a game. But the way she was looking at him, with trust that was still fragile, but growing, made him swallow back the confession. I'm just a guy, he said instead, forcing a casual shrug, trying to figure things out. Jasmine watched him for a beat longer, then nodded. All right, Carter, she said, picking up her fork. But one day, I'm gonna crack you. Ethan forced a smile. He just hoped she never did. By the time they left the restaurant, it was late. Ethan walked beside her down the dimly lit street, hands in his pockets. You cold? He asked. Jasmine shook her head. Nah, I like the cold. Ethan smirked. That tracks. You strike me as someone who never complains. Jasmine gave him a side glance. You definitely don't know me then. They reached her apartment building, and for a moment there was a hesitation between them. Jasmine exhaled. I had a nice time. Ethan nodded. Me too. A beat passed. Then, before he could think better of it, he said, Let me take you out again. Jasmine paused. Something in her expression softened. Just a little. Maybe, she said finally. Ethan grinned. That was all he needed. Ethan returned to his penthouse that night, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Excitement. But as he poured himself a drink, his phone buzzed. A message from Blake. Blake. Tell me you're still playing the game. Ethan stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. And then, before he could stop himself, he deleted the message. Because if he thought about it too hard, he'd have to admit the truth. This wasn't a game anymore. And he had no idea what to do about it. The days after their first date felt different. Jasmine didn't say it out loud, but she knew something had shifted between them. Ethan was no longer just the persistent stranger who showed up at McDonald's. Now, he was something more, something dangerously close to real. And that terrified her, because she had been here before. And last time, she barely made it out alive. Jasmine stood outside the Brooklyn Community Center, watching as kids laughed and played under the late afternoon sun. She had spent years here, building a life, piece by fragile piece. But no matter how much she moved forward, the past had a way of finding her again. And today, it had come knocking. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. Her stomach tightened. She didn't have to answer to know who it was. Against her better judgment, she answered. And the moment she heard his voice, a chill ran down her spine. Hello, sweetheart. Jasmine froze. It had been years. Years since she last heard Derek's voice. Years since she had walked away. Bruised, scared, but alive. And yet here he was, as if time had never passed. You think I wouldn't find you? Derek's voice was smooth, almost amused. Come on, Jasmine. You know me better than that. Jasmine gripped the phone tightly, her breath shallow. What do you want? She managed, keeping her voice calm. Derek chuckled. I just wanted to see how my girl was doing. Been a long time. I'm not your girl, Jasmine said through gritted teeth. A pause. Then, we'll see about that. And the line went dead. Jasmine stood there, her heart pounding. Numbers she had worked too hard to escape him. She wasn't going to let him drag her back into the darkness. Later that evening, Ethan noticed something was wrong. They were sitting on a park bench near her apartment, one of the few places where Jasmine felt like she could breathe. But tonight, she was quiet. Too quiet. Jasmine, Ethan said, his voice softer than usual. What's going on? She hesitated. She could tell him. Tell him about Derek, about the nights she spent hiding, about the fear she still carried. But Ethan wasn't hers. Not yet, and she wasn't sure if she could handle the weight of his pity. So instead, she forced a small smile. Just a long day. Ethan studied her, and for a moment, she thought he was going to press further. But then, he nodded. All right. But if you ever need to talk, I know. Jasmine cut in, standing up. I should get inside. Ethan watched her go, a gnawing feeling in his chest. Because for the first time he could tell, she was keeping something from him. Jasmine didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside her window felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed too long. And then, at 2 a.m., a noise, a scraping sound at her front door. She bolted upright, her breath caught in her throat. Then, a single chilling knock. Bang. She didn't move. Bang. The knob twisted, locked. But still, she barely breathed. Then, after what felt like forever, the footsteps faded. Jasmine sat in the dark, her hands shaking. He had found her, and he wasn't going away. The next morning, Ethan saw her at McDonald's, and the moment he laid eyes on her, he knew. She looked tired. Her usual fire dimmed. Something had happened. He waited until she was on break, then walked over to her table. Jasmine, he said, sitting across from her. She looked up, startled. Ethan. He frowned. You're shaking. Jasmine glanced at her hands. She hadn't even realized. Ethan leaned in, his voice quieter. Talk to me. Jasmine almost did, but then a voice cut through the air. Hey, sweetheart. Jasmine's entire body stiffened, and when Ethan turned, he saw him, a man with a smug smile and cruel eyes. Derek. Derek sauntered over, looking Ethan up and down. This your new guy, Jasmine? He asked. Cute, rich too. You always did have good taste. Ethan's jaw tightened. Jasmine stood quickly, stepping between them. Derek, leave. Derek grinned. I just wanted to say hi. Ethan's voice was ice cold. I think she told you to leave. Derek chuckled. Relax, rich boy. Just catching up. Ethan stood, towering over him. Walk us away. For the first time, Derek's smirk faltered. Jasmine grabbed Ethan's arm. Don't, she whispered. A tense silence stretched between them. Then, Derek laughed. See you around, sweetheart, he said before strolling away. Jasmine let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. But Ethan wasn't done. Who the hell was that? He asked, his voice low but dangerous. Jasmine swallowed. She could keep running, or she could tell the truth. She took a shaky breath and told him everything. Ethan listened silently, his fists clenched. When she was done, Jasmine looked away. This is why I don't let people in, Ethan. Because guys like him, like Derek, don't go away. Ethan was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he won't touch you again. Jasmine looked at him sharply. Ethan, he won't touch you again. Something in his voice sent a shiver down her spine because she believed him, and for the first time in years, she felt safe, even if she wasn't sure she should. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was afraid, not of losing a deal, not of financial risks, but of losing Jasmine. And it was a fear that he couldn't ignore anymore. Because when he had promised her that Derek would never hurt her again, he meant it. And now he was ready to prove it, even if it meant risking everything. Days had passed since the confrontation at McDonald's. Ethan had expected Jasmine to pull away, to retreat into the walls she had spent years building. But instead, she had done something he never saw coming. She let him in. It was subtle at first, a look that lasted a second too long, a pause before she said goodbye, like she didn't really want to leave. And one night, when they sat on the rooftop of her apartment building, looking over Brooklyn's skyline, she had rested her head on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to, because in that moment, Ethan knew. She was starting to trust him, and he wasn't about to let that go. That same night, Ethan met up with Blake Davenport. It was time to put an end to the bet, once and for all. They met at a private lounge, the kind of place where men in custom suits and women in silk dresses made deals over champagne and quiet whispers. Blake lounged back, his smirk in place. "So," he drawled, "did she say yes yet?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm calling it off." Blake's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "The bet's over. I don't care about the money." Blake let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Damn, you really fell for her, huh?" Ethan didn't deny it. He just held Blake's gaze. "I'm marrying her," he said. "Not because of the bet. Because I want to." Blake studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow, knowing grin, he raised his glass. "Well, well, looks like the great Ethan Carter finally met his match." Ethan didn't smile, because for the first time, he wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about forever. The next morning, Ethan went to find Jasmine. He didn't have a grand plan. Didn't have some over-the-top, billionaire-style proposal with helicopters or diamonds the size of his fist, because Jasmine wouldn't want that. So instead, he found her exactly where he knew she'd be, at the Brooklyn Community Center. And as she sat outside, watching the kids play, he dropped to one knee. Jasmine's eyes widened. "Ethan." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't extravagant. But it was perfect. For her. "I know this is crazy," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "And I know we haven't known each other that long. But Jasmine, He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I love you," he admitted. "I didn't expect to. Hell, I didn't even think I could. But you changed everything." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Ethan continued. "You showed me that there's more to life than money, than power. You made me want to be better. And I don't want to imagine a future without you in it." A long silence stretched between them. Jasmine swallowed hard. Her heart pounded. She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that this was real. But there was still a voice in the back of her mind, a voice that whispered, "What if it's all just another game?" Jasmine licked her lips, staring at the ring. "Ethan," she said carefully, This is a lot." "I know," he said quickly. "And if you're not ready, that's okay. But I had to ask. Because I'm all in, Jasmine. No matter how long it takes, I need you to know that." Jasmine's chest tightened. She could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a game to him anymore. But could she really trust that? Could she really trust him? She took a slow breath. And then, she did something she never thought she would. She said yes. The news spread fast. By that evening, Ethan's engagement was all over social media. And while some people congratulated them, others weren't as kind. "A billionaire and a McDonald's worker? This has to be a joke." Gold digger alert. She's just using him for money. Jasmine tried to ignore the comments, tried to pretend they didn't bother her. But they did. And the worst part? She wasn't sure if they were wrong. Because what if she was just a charity case to him? What if she was just another impulse decision? And what if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? Jasmine kept her distance in the days following the proposal. Ethan noticed, and one night, as they sat in his car outside her apartment, he finally asked, "Do you regret saying yes?" Jasmine looked down at her hands. "I don't know," she admitted softly. Ethan's heart sank, but he nodded. "Okay, then let's take it slow." Jasmine glanced at him. "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "I meant it when I said I was all in, Jasmine. I don't need an answer right now. Just don't shut me out." Jasmine exhaled, feeling something in her chest ease. Maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. For the first time in her life, Jasmine Brooks was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. It felt surreal, like a dream she wasn't supposed to have. A billionaire had proposed to her. Not just any billionaire. Ethan Carter. A man who could have any woman in the world had chosen her. And every time she looked down at the ring on her finger, she felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this was real. Maybe she could have a love story like in the movies. But the thing about dreams, they never last. The night was perfect. Ethan had rented out a private estate in upstate New York, far from the prying eyes of the media. The guest list was small, only close friends and a few key people from Ethan's world. And for the first time, Jasmine was stepping into that world. Dressed in a sleek midnight blue gown, she felt different, felt like she actually belonged. Ethan stayed by her side all evening, his hand resting on the small of her back, his gaze always on her. And for the first time, she wasn't just the girl from McDonald's, she was his fiancée. And she was starting to believe it, until Blake Davenport opened his mouth. Blake was drunk, not just tipsy, absolutely wasted. And Blake drunk was a dangerous thing, because drunk Blake liked to talk, liked to brag. And when he strolled up to Jasmine with a smirk, whiskey glass in hand, she had no idea her entire world was about to come crashing down. "Jasmine," Blake drawled, swaying slightly. "Damn, you really won the jackpot, huh?" Jasmine forced a polite smile. "It's nice to see you, Blake." Blake grinned. "Oh, come on. You don't have to play nice with me. We both know how this started." Jasmine blinked. "What?" Blake laughed. "You seriously don't know?" He turned, looking around. "Where's Ethan? He hasn't told you?" Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "Told me what?" Blake leaned in, dropping his voice. "The bet, sweetheart." Jasmine froze. Blake smirked. "You really don't know, do you?" The air left her lungs. Her hands shook. "What? Bet?" Blake chuckled, shaking his head. "Wow. He actually fell for you." He downed the rest of his drink. "But yeah, sweetheart. Ethan didn't just choose you. We made a bet. $5 million, said he couldn't get a girl like you to marry him in 6 months." Silence. Absolute silence. Then, the sound of her own heartbeat, thundering in her ears. Her chest tightened. Her fingers clenched around the stem of her champagne glass. Blake sighed dramatically. "But hey, don't take it too hard. I mean, he actually loves you now. So technically you won." Won. Won. Like she was a prize. Like her love was a game. Jasmine's throat closed up. She needed to leave. She needed to get out of there. Now Ethan was across the room, mid-conversation with a business associate, when he saw her face. The way her expression had shifted, the way her posture had stiffened. He knew something was wrong. And then, She turned and walked out. Without a word, his heart dropped. Without thinking, he excused himself and followed her. Jasmine? She ignored him, kept walking, her heels clicking against the marble floors as she stormed toward the exit. Jasmine, wait. She spun around. How could you? Ethan stopped dead. The way she said it, like she was in pain, like he had ripped her heart out. His stomach dropped. What? The bet, she spat. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? His blood turned cold. Jasmine, I don't. She cut him off. Her voice shook. Just don't. Tell me the truth, Ethan. Did you? She took a breath, as if she was trying to stop herself from breaking. Did you bet on me? Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Crushing. Ethan swallowed hard. Yes. Jasmine let out a choked laugh. Unbelievable. Jasmine, listen to me, he said quickly. It started that way, but it's not. Not what? She snapped. Not real? It is real. He grabbed her hands, but she yanked them away. Don't touch me, she hissed. Ethan's chest tightened. Jasmine, please. Was I just a game to you? She whispered. His stomach twisted. No, he said desperately. You weren't. I swear to God, Jasmine, Shut up, she said. His breath caught. She stepped back, her entire body trembling. I was starting to believe you, she whispered. Starting to believe that you actually, that maybe you were different. His heart shattered. Jasmine, don't do this, he begged. She shook her head. You already did. And then she walked away, leaving him alone, with nothing but the weight of his own mistakes. Jasmine didn't answer his calls, didn't respond to his texts. She shut him out completely. And Ethan, for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix it. He had lost her. And maybe he deserved it. Ethan Carter had lost deals before. He had lost money. He had lost employees. He had even lost entire companies in hostile takeovers. But he had never lost like this, never felt this kind of emptiness, this kind of pain. Losing Jasmine was different. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter had no idea how to fix it. The morning after the engagement party, Ethan woke up in his penthouse, alone. The sheets next to him were cold. There was no text from Jasmine, no missed calls, just silence. He ran a hand over his face, trying to shake off the haze of last night. But the memory hit him all over again. The way she had looked at him, like he was nothing, like he had destroyed everything. And maybe he had. He stopped going to work, stopped answering calls from investors, stopped showing up to meetings. The board of Carter Tech was panicking. Blake had tried calling. Lucas, Anthony, his assistant, all ignored. Because the only call Ethan wanted to receive would never come. It wasn't long before the media caught on. Ethan Carter ghosts his own company. Where is the tech billionaire? Jasmine Brooks, seen without engagement ring. He saw the headlines, saw the photos of Jasmine walking through Brooklyn. No ring, no trace of him in her life anymore. And that's when it really hit him. She was gone, and she wasn't coming back. Ethan Carter was not a man who quit. Not in business, not in life. But for the first time, he felt tired. So he made a decision, one that shocked everyone. I'm stepping down, Ethan said. The Carter Tech boardroom was silent, stunned. Ethan sat at the head of the glass conference table, hands clasped. The directors looked at each other, as if trying to figure out if he was serious. Blake was the first to break the silence. You can't be serious? Ethan exhaled. Tired. I am. Anthony leaned forward. Ethan, you built this company from the ground up. You're just gonna walk away? Yes. Because of her? Lucas asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's more than that. More than that? Blake scoffed. Ethan, you are self-destructing over a woman who... Ethan slammed his hand on the table. The entire boardroom jumped. Don't, he said, voice low. Don't talk about her like that. Silence. Blake sat back, raising his hands in surrender. Ethan took a deep breath. This company will be fine without me. I've trained the best people. I'll still hold shares, but I'm done running it. More silence. Then, Lucas exhaled. What are you gonna do? Ethan hesitated. Then he looked up, eyes clear. I'm going to do something that actually matters. And then, without another word, he walked out, leaving behind Carter Tech, leaving behind the life he thought he wanted. Jasmine Brooks didn't cry. She refused to. She had survived worse. She had survived poverty. She had survived loss. And she would survive this. But no matter how much she told herself that, she couldn't ignore the ache. The nights when she reached for her phone, only to stop herself. The moments when she missed him and hated herself for it. Miss Jasmine, are you okay? Jasmine looked up from the papers on her desk. Dante, one of the kids she tutored, was watching her with curious eyes. She forced a smile. Of course, Dante. Why wouldn't I be? The 12-year-old tilted his head. You don't smile as much anymore. Jasmine's heart squeezed. She took a breath, and then softly, I'll be okay, Dante. I promise, even if she didn't believe it. Jasmine had stopped paying attention to Ethan. She avoided headlines, avoided places where he might be. But then, she heard about the foundation, a new nonprofit, one aimed at providing scholarships for young women in underprivileged communities, named after her, the Brooks Scholarship, for young women who wanted to be teachers, for girls like her, who never had the chance. And Ethan? He wasn't just donating money. He was in the trenches, going to schools, meeting with students, actually caring. Jasmine's chest tightened, because this wasn't just a grand gesture. This was real. And for the first time, she didn't know what to feel. Weeks passed, then months, until one day, Jasmine walked into the community center and saw him. Ethan was standing there, holding a stack of books, laughing with a group of kids, looking happy, looking different. And Jasmine froze, because for the first time since she walked away, she wasn't sure if she still wanted to. Ethan Carter had never waited for anything in his life. Not for money, not for deals, not for women, but for Jasmine Brooks. He would wait, as long as it took. It started with small things, things Ethan never would have cared about before, things that Jasmine had always cared about, like education, like opportunities, like giving back. And so, Ethan built the Carter Foundation, not to impress her, not to win her back, but because for the first time in his life, he wanted to do something that actually mattered. The first Brooks Scholarship went to a girl named Sofia Ramirez, 17 years old, a straight A student, a future teacher. Jasmine found out by accident. She was at the community center, grading papers, when a woman named Maria Ramirez approached her. Are you Jasmine Brooks? The woman asked, voice hopeful. Jasmine hesitated. Yes. The woman smiled. I just wanted to say thank you. Because of your scholarship, my daughter is going to college. Jasmine blinked. My... what? Maria pulled out a flyer. A Carter Foundation flyer. The Brooks Scholarship for young women who wanted to be teachers. Jasmine's chest tightened. She looked down at the flyer, at Ethan's name, and for the first time since the engagement party, she felt something other than anger. Ethan didn't stop at one scholarship. He expanded. Partnerships with community centers, mentorship programs for underprivileged kids, grants for students who couldn't afford tuition. And he didn't just write checks. He was there, present, involved. And Jasmine noticed, even though she wouldn't admit it. One night, Ethan was in his office at the Carter Foundation. When his past walked in, Blake Davenport. Ethan looked up. Blake. Blake smirked. You look like hell. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I feel like hell. Blake shrugged. You did this to yourself, you know. Ethan exhaled. I know. Blake sat down across from him. Listen, man, you've made your point. You lost the bet. You lost her. And now what? You're playing charity? Ethan's jaw tightened. This isn't about the bet, Blake. Blake chuckled. Then what is it about? Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stared at his old friend. And finally he said, It's about making things right. Blake scoffed. Yeah? And do you think Jasmine gives a damn? Do you think she's watching? Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't care if she is. And for the first time, that was true. Blake shook his head. You really did fall for her. Ethan's eyes darkened. I never should have made that bet. Blake sighed. Well, good luck fixing it. And with that, he walked out, leaving Ethan alone. But more determined than ever, even though she tried to ignore him, Ethan Carter was everywhere. On the news, in the community, and worst of all, in her thoughts. Mia noticed first. Jasmine? Jasmine looked up from her laptop. Yeah? Mia smirked. You're thinking about him again. Jasmine sighed. Mia, I'm just saying, Mia said, stretching on the couch. The guy is literally out here running a whole foundation. For you. Jasmine rolled her eyes. It's not for me. Mia raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? Jasmine hesitated. Because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. It happened by accident. A rainy afternoon. Jasmine was at the community center, finishing up a lesson, when she heard a familiar voice, his voice. She froze, turned around, and saw him, Ethan Carter, standing by the front desk, holding a stack of books, talking to a group of students and laughing. Jasmine's chest tightened, because he looked happy, not like the man she had walked away from, not like the man who had broken her heart, but someone different, and that scared her. So, she did the only thing she could. She walked away, but it was too late. Ethan saw her, and for a second, the world stopped. Jasmine. She was right there. He wanted to run to her, to apologize again, to tell her everything. But instead, he just watched as she walked out. And for the first time in months, he felt hope, because she was still here, still watching, still listening, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't gone forever. Jasmine Brooks had been fighting battles her whole life. Some were small, like making sure there was enough food on the table for Mia. Some were huge, like losing her parents overnight and having to raise a teenager while barely surviving herself. But the worst battle, the one that still haunted her dreams, was Derek. And tonight, he was back. It started with a phone call. Unknown number. Jasmine almost ignored it. But something told her to pick up. Hello? A pause. Then, did you miss me, Jasmine? Her stomach dropped. She knew that voice that used to make her flinch, that voice that used to whisper threats in the dark. Derek. Jasmine's grip tightened on the phone. What do you want? She said, keeping her voice steady. Derek chuckled. I just got out, baby. Thought I'd pay you a visit. Jasmine's heart pounded. I have nothing to say to you. But I have plenty to say to you, Derek said, his tone turning dangerous. And then, I saw Mia today. Jasmine's blood ran cold. She hung up immediately, then grabbed her keys. Her hands shook as she dialed Mia's number, straight to voicemail. Her mind raced. Where was Mia? Was she safe? Jasmine ran out of her apartment, jumped into her car, and sped toward the community center. The one place Mia went after school. She could barely breathe as she drove. All she could hear was Derek's voice. I saw Mia today. Jasmine burst into the community center, eyes wild, heart racing. Have you seen Mia? She asked frantically. A volunteer pointed. She left about an hour ago. Said she was going to grab food. Jasmine cursed, then turned and froze. Because standing near the entrance, watching her with concern, was Ethan. He saw the fear in her eyes before she even spoke. Jasmine? His voice was calm, but laced with worry. She hesitated, but then she broke. Derek's back, she whispered. Ethan's face darkened. Where's Mia? I don't know. She's not answering. Ethan immediately pulled out his phone. Lucas, I need a favor. Now. Jasmine stared at him. Who are you calling? A friend, Ethan said. We'll find her. Jasmine wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his help. But right now she didn't care about pride. She just wanted Mia safe. Ethan moved fast. Within minutes, his contacts had pinged Mia's phone, checked security footage near the community center, narrowed her last location. She's at the McDonald's on 5th, Ethan said, already heading for his car. Jasmine followed. They drove in silence, Jasmine's hands clenched into fists. If Derek laid a finger on her sister, she would end him. They pulled up to the McDonald's. Jasmine's heart stopped. Mia was outside, standing by a black car, and Derek was there, tall, menacing, smirking like he owned the world. Jasmine threw the car door open. M.I.A. Mia turned, eyes widening. Jasmine! Derek grabbed her wrist. Jasmine saw red. Ethan was out of the car before Jasmine could move, and in seconds, he was on Derek. You don't touch her. Ethan's voice was low. Dangerous. Derek laughed. And who the hell are you? Jasmine's heart pounded. This was bad. Derek was violent, unpredictable. And Ethan. Ethan looked ready to kill. Derek shoved Ethan. Ethan barely moved. He just smiled. You want to try that again? Derek swung. Ethan dodged, and then Ethan punched him, hard. Derek stumbled back. Jasmine grabbed Mia, pulled her away, and then, sirens. The cops arrived. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn. Derek Foster, you're under arrest. Jasmine exhaled. The nightmare was over. Derek was finally going away. For good. Mia shook in Jasmine's arms. It's okay, Jasmine whispered. You're safe now. Mia nodded, but her eyes drifted to Ethan. So did Jasmine's. Ethan stood there, breathing heavy, knuckles bruised, and watching her, like she was the only thing that mattered. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and Jasmine felt something shift, because tonight, for the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, Ethan Carter wasn't the villain she thought he was. Maybe, just maybe, he was something more. For days after the incident with Derek, Jasmine found herself conflicted. Ethan had saved Mia. He had stood up for them when no one else had. But did that erase the past? Could she forgive him for the bet? Could she ever trust him again? The thought kept her up at night, but she refused to admit it. Instead, she buried herself in work. She spent long hours at the community center, avoiding the thoughts that crept in whenever she was alone. And most of all, she avoided Ethan. But Ethan? He wasn't going anywhere. Ethan Carter was not a man who gave up. He had spent his entire life winning. And yet, for the first time, winning didn't feel like the goal. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was about Jasmine, about showing her that what he felt was real, that she was real. And so, Ethan did something he had never done before. He stepped back. He waited. He let Jasmine have space. But behind the scenes, he was planning something big, something that would change everything. It started with an email. Jasmine was sorting through paperwork at the community center when she saw it. Subject: Proposal for Education Development. Her heart stopped. She opened it, eyes scanning the contents, and froze. Ethan had bought a building, a massive, empty property in the heart of Brooklyn, and he was turning it into a school, a real school, for kids like Dante, for kids who had nowhere else to go, for her dream. Her hands shook as she scrolled down. At the bottom, a single line: I don't want to take credit for this. I want you to run it, Ethan. Jasmine's breath hitched. What was he doing? She found him that night, at his penthouse, stormed past his assistant, barged into his office. Ethan looked up, calm, like he had been expecting her. Jasmine slammed the papers on his desk. What the hell is this? Ethan leaned back, watching her. An opportunity, he said simply. Jasmine's jaw tightened. You don't just buy buildings and hand them to people, Ethan. Why not? He asked. Because that's not how this works. Ethan stood up, slowly, and for the first time. Jasmine saw uncertainty in his eyes. This isn't about proving anything, he said, voice softer. This is about giving you the chance to do what you were always meant to do. Jasmine swallowed hard. You can't buy your way into my life. I'm not trying to, he said. A beat of silence. Then, I just want to be a part of what matters to you. Jasmine felt her chest tighten. This wasn't like before. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't about the bet. It felt real, and that terrified her. Jasmine didn't give him an answer right away. She took the blueprints home, studied them, visited the building herself, and as she stood in the empty hallways, imagining what it could be, something inside her shifted. This wasn't about Ethan. This was about the kids. This was about the dream she had given up on. Could she really walk away from this? The answer was clear. So, a week later, she walked into Ethan's office and nodded. I'll do it, she said. Ethan didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just said, good. And for the first time in months, Jasmine felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. The school took months to complete, but when it finally opened, it was perfect. There were classrooms, libraries, a playground for kids who had never had one. And at the center of it all, Jasmine, standing on the stage, looking out at hundreds of children and their families. And beside her was Ethan. They weren't together. Not yet. But tonight, as she spoke about hope, about second chances, she knew one thing for sure. Ethan Carter wasn't just a part of her past. He was becoming part of her future, whether she was ready for it or not. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The school was real. The doors had opened. Children from all over the community, kids who had been neglected, ignored, or left behind, finally had a place to belong. It should have been the happiest moment of her life. And Kyo, something still felt unfinished. Because despite everything, despite the school, despite the changes Ethan had made, despite the countless ways he had proven himself, Jasmine still wasn't sure if she could trust him. Not with her heart, not again. And that scared her more than anything. One afternoon, as Jasmine walked through the hallways of the school, she heard a voice she hadn't expected. Miss Brooks. She turned and froze. Dante. The 12-year-old boy she had once tutored, the boy who had been on the brink of dropping out, stood in the doorway looking different, taller, more confident, stronger. Jasmine's heart swelled. Dante, what are you doing here? He grinned, holding up a volunteer badge. Figured I'd come back and help. You always told me that one day I'd make a difference. Guess I wanted to start now. Jasmine felt a lump in her throat. She had never expected this. She had spent so much time doubting herself, doubting the impact she could have. And yet, here was proof that what she had done mattered, that this school, this dream, it was changing lives. I'm proud of you, she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Ethan was still there. Not in the way he used to be, not pushing, not forcing his way in, but just present. Somehow, he had become a constant in her life. He worked late at the school, funding new programs, helping organize scholarships, even mentoring kids himself. He stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't act like a savior. He wasn't trying to win her over. He was just doing the work, and Jasmine couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't the Ethan Carter she had met all those months ago. This was someone else, someone better. But was it enough? One evening, as they were locking up, Ethan spoke. Dinner. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Have dinner with me, he said. Not as a date, not as anything more than two people who have been through hell together and might actually have something left to talk about. Jasmine hesitated. She should have said no. She should have told him she wasn't ready. But instead, she heard herself say, fine. They met at a small, quiet restaurant. Nothing extravagant, nothing overwhelming. Just two people, sitting across from each other, trying to figure out where they stood. The conversation was light at first. Work, the school, Dante's return. Then, Jasmine sighed, setting down her fork. Why did you really do it? She asked. Ethan looked at her. Do what? The school, the foundation, everything. Why did you really do it, Ethan? For a long time, he didn't answer. Then, because I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved you. Jasmine's breath caught. Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to love me again. But if nothing else, I needed you to know that I never took you for granted, that I never wanted to hurt you, and that I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never do again. Jasmine felt her chest tighten. This was different. This wasn't Ethan trying to win. This wasn't about his ego. This was real. And for the first time she thought maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe him. They started seeing each other again. Not in the way they had before. Not rushing, not jumping in head first, just spending time together. Jasmine would find Ethan waiting at the school, helping out after hours. Ethan would bring Jasmine coffee on late nights. When she stayed working, they weren't together. Not yet, but they were something, and for the first time, that was enough. One evening, as Jasmine came home, she found Mia sitting at the kitchen table. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. Jasmine sighed, setting down her bag. All right, go ahead. Say it. Mia smirked. Say what? That I'm an idiot. That I shouldn't trust him. That this is a bad idea. Mia shrugged. You already know that. I don't have to say it. Jasmine groaned, rubbing her temples. Mia. But Mia interrupted. I also know that you still love him. Jasmine froze. Mia sighed. I don't like what he did. I don't like that he lied to you. But I also see the way you look at him. And I see the way he looks at you. Jasmine swallowed hard. And what do you see? Mia gave a small smile. I see two people, who might actually deserve a second chance. Jasmine felt something in her chest loosen. Maybe, just maybe, Mia was right. Later that night, as Jasmine lay in bed, she thought about everything, the past, the pain, the lies, but also the growth, the way Ethan had changed, the way he had fought for her, not with grand gestures, but with consistent actions. and she realized she was tired of being scared, tired of running from what she felt, tired of pretending she didn't still love him. So, the next morning, she made a decision. Ethan opened the door and froze. Jasmine stood there, hands in her pockets, eyes uncertain but determined. She took a deep breath. I don't know where this is going. I don't know if I can ever trust you completely again. But I know one thing. Ethan waited. Jasmine met his gaze. I don't want to lose you again. And that was all he needed to hear. Jasmine hadn't said yes, not yet. She hadn't said no either. And for Ethan, that was enough. For months they had been rebuilding, not just their relationship, but the trust that had been shattered. Ethan had learned that trust wasn't something he could buy. It wasn't something he could force. It was something he had to earn. And every single day, he worked to do just that. But the one thing he still hadn't done was ask her to be his again. Not because he was afraid of rejection. Not because he thought she wasn't ready. But because this time, he knew. It had to be real. One evening, Ethan sat with Blake at a quiet rooftop bar in Manhattan. It had been months since they last spoke, and in that time, Ethan had barely thought about the man who had once been his closest friend. But tonight, as he swirled his drink, he couldn't shake the question that had been haunting him. Am I crazy for thinking she'll actually say yes? Blake raised an eyebrow, setting down his glass. You? Crazy? Absolutely. Ethan gave him a dry look. Blake chuckled. Listen, man, you spent your whole life treating love like a game, like some business deal you could control. But the fact that you're even asking that question? He leaned back, shaking his head. It means you actually care about the answer. Ethan exhaled. Yeah. Blake studied him for a moment. Then, so, how are you gonna ask? Ethan hesitated. Because the truth was, he had no idea. Jasmine had always hated grand gestures. She didn't care about diamonds, didn't care about flashy proposals, didn't care about expensive vacations, designer dresses, or the kind of lifestyle he had once flaunted. She cared about honesty, about consistency, about knowing that when she let someone in, they wouldn't betray her. So if he was going to do this, if he was going to ask her to marry him again, it had to be different. It had to be real. One evening, as they walked through the nearly finished Brooklyn Learning Center, Jasmine glanced at him. You're quiet tonight. Ethan gave a small smile. Just thinking. She smirked. That's dangerous. He chuckled, but didn't say anything. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jasmine froze. Her breath caught. Ethan, before you say anything, he interrupted softly. Just let me talk. She closed her mouth, eyes wary but curious. Ethan swallowed, took a deep breath. Then, I got it wrong the first time. Jasmine's heart pounded. Ethan held her gaze. I thought love was something you could win, something you could earn, like a prize or a business deal. He shook his head. I was wrong. His voice was quiet, steady. Love is something you fight for, every single day. It's not perfect. It's not easy. But it's real. And it's worth every mistake, every second chance, every ounce of effort you have to give. Jasmine's chest tightened. Ethan exhaled. Then, he opened the box. Inside wasn't some massive, flashy diamond. It was simple, elegant, timeless, and for the first time, it was exactly right. Ethan's voice was soft. Jasmine, I don't care if it takes a lifetime to prove to you that I mean this, that I love you, that I will never take you for granted again. But I do know one thing. He took a step closer, looked her straight in the eyes. I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. A beat of silence. Then, will you marry me? Jasmine stared at him. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she could speak. Because this time was different. This wasn't about some bet. This wasn't about his ego. This was real, and she knew it. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, just looked at the man in front of her. The man who had changed, the man who had fought for her, the man she still loved. And then she nodded, just once. And Ethan let out a breath he didn't even realize he had been holding. Then Jasmine whispered, "Yes," and Ethan smiled, because for the first time in his life, he had finally gotten it right. The day had finally arrived. But it wasn't the kind of wedding anyone expected. No massive ballroom, no celebrity guest list, no extravagant displays of wealth. Instead, Jasmine and Ethan stood in the heart of Brooklyn Community Center, the very place that had brought them together, the place that had become a second home to so many, a place built on love, resilience, and second chances. The decorations were simple but beautiful. String lights hanging overhead, tables filled with fresh flowers donated by local businesses, rows of seats filled with friends, family, students, and mentors. It was perfect, not because of the setting, but because of the people in it. As Jasmine stood at the entrance, she took a deep breath. Mia, standing beside her, squeezed her hand. "You okay?" Jasmine smiled. Yeah. She wasn't just okay. She was finally at peace. The music began, and as she took her first step down the aisle, she saw him, Ethan, waiting for her. And the way he looked at her, like she was the most important thing in his world, told her that this moment, this love, this future, was exactly where she was meant to be. As they stood before their loved ones, Ethan took a deep breath, looked Jasmine in the eyes, and spoke from his heart. "Jasmine, I used to think that love was something you won, that if you played the right moves, made the right choices, you could control it. But you taught me that love isn't about control. It's about choice." His voice was steady. "You chose to forgive me when I didn't deserve it. You chose to trust me when you had every reason not to. And now, I'm choosing to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I will never take that choice for granted." A soft gasp from the crowd. Even Jasmine's eyes glimmered with emotion. Ethan swallowed, then smiled. "I love you, Jasmine, and I vow to never stop choosing you every single day." The audience fell silent until Jasmine let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You always did have a way with words." Ethan grinned. Then Jasmine took a breath and spoke her vows. "Ethan, I used to think love was something that always came with conditions, that trusting someone meant opening yourself up to disappointment. But you showed me that real love isn't about perfection. It's about effort." Her voice was steady. "You fought for me. You fought for us. And every time I gave you a reason to walk away, you stayed. You proved to me that love isn't just about promises. It's about actions. And today, I promise to keep choosing you, just like you've chosen me." Silence. Then, applause, tears, and most importantly, a kiss that sealed everything. After the ceremony, the reception was unlike any other. Students from the community center performed music. Volunteers gave speeches about how Jasmine and Ethan had changed their lives. Mia, standing tall beside her sister, thanked Ethan for being the family they never expected. And as the night continued, Ethan pulled Jasmine aside. They stood beneath the warm glow of the string lights, away from the crowd. Ethan took her hand. "So, Mrs. Carter, what now?" Jasmine smiled. "Now," she exhaled, looked around the place they built together, then whispered, "Now, we make a difference." Ethan kissed her forehead. "Together." Months passed. Their work expanded. The Brooklyn Learning Center flourished. More scholarships were created. More students were given hope. And through it all, they stood side by side. Until one evening, Jasmine sat Ethan down, took a deep breath, and said the three words that changed everything. "I'm pregnant." Ethan's world stopped. For the first time in his life, he was truly speechless. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, and as he wrapped his arms around Jasmine, pressing his forehead to hers, he whispered, "We're going to be parents." And for the first time, Ethan Carter knew exactly what happiness felt like. Years later, Jasmine and Ethan sat in the very same Brooklyn Learning Center, watching their daughter take her first steps. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But they had built something real, something worth fighting for. And as Ethan held his wife and daughter close, he knew he had finally won the only thing that had ever mattered. Not money, not power, not status, but family. And this time, he wasn't ever letting go. As Jasmine and Ethan stood together, watching their daughter giggle as she took another wobbly step, they knew life had tested them, challenged them, broken them. But in the end, they chose love. Because love isn't just about the grand gestures or the perfect fairy tale. It's about choosing each other every single day, through the good, the bad, and the moments you never saw coming. And now, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in their journey? Have you ever experienced a love that was worth fighting for? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Love. And if you love stories that make you feel something real, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because trust me, the next story, it's going to be even more powerful. See you soon. Blast off.